Uh, it's begun recording, and I'll read out your bio and welcome everybody who's here. Thank you so much. This is Pen at Prithvi. We used to broadcast before the lockdown from Prithvi Studios, which is part of the Prithvi Theatre Group. So the background was much better. But now that we are all stuck at home, we are Zooming from, we're doing Zoom sessions from our own little rooms, from our own little homes. So we are a fortnightly online session where we talk to writers and editors from India and beyond, writing in multiple languages and multiple genres. Today, it's incredible that, I've been looking forward to this session for a long time. We have Supriya Nair, journalist, editor, columnist. And so I'm going to read out her bio. We'll come back to that bio also, but we're going to talk about her media enterprise, which is called 52.in. And the session is about 52.in, so we're going to talk about it. It's very, very unique, not just in India, but anywhere. And we're going to look at a few articles and we're going to talk about it. So first, her bio. Supriya Nair, I mean, you know her. You probably already follow her on Twitter. She's incredibly popular on Twitter. But do you also know that her work has appeared in N+1 Scroll.in, Financial Times, Foreign Policy, Economic and Political Weekly, as a writer, as a journalist, and she's of course been an editor at multiple places, including, I believe, The Caravan.
That's right.
And now she's in a senior management role at the helm. She helmed several enterprises, and now she's editor of 52.in, co-founder of All Things Small, and editor 52.in. And 52, just so that just for context, every week, I'll just quote from the website itself. Every week, 52 publishes an essay that dives deep into an aspect of India's history, politics, and culture. Each story will explain, recall, or establish something interesting about life on our subcontinent and tell readers why it matters to them. With Sunil Doshi, to continue with her bio, with Sunil Doshi, Sidin Vadukut, Devaya Bopanna, and Gaurav Vaz, Nair founded All Things Small in order to address a perceived need in the media sphere, which Doshi has articulated in this way. ATS wants to tell true, real stories about real people where corporate media is not able to go because of various compulsions that they have. So we'll also be talking about the parent organization. Supriya, welcome.
Hi, Suhit. It's wonderful to be in conversation with you. For those who may not have been there, the last time Suhit and I met and spoke was face-to-face at the Kalagoda Literature Festival a year and a half ago now, where we were at an amazing poetry reading session with our friends, with some of Bombay's best poets, and the camaraderie and the joy of that time. It's a memory of warmth.
Absolutely.
18 months after, when such gatherings have been like a dream. So it is my very great pleasure to be in conversation with Suhit, and I'm honored to be part of the Pen at Prithvi series.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So Supriya, 52.in, as the name suggests, it brings out one article or one essay per week, 52 in a year. It's a gorgeous idea. It's a fantastic idea. Can you just unpack it a little for us?
I think this might be easier if I spoke about where what the fundamentals of 52 are.
Yeah.
A few years ago, my co-founders and I were lucky enough to come together and bring various disparate ideas for things we all wanted to do together, and to get funding for it, for an organization that became our company, All Things Small. The All Things Small was a media company that was meant to do many different things that would all be connected by a single thread, which was that everything we would do would be based in telling true stories. This included journalism, research, history, and things that we were looking forward to discovering that we had no idea of when we began. And the way All Things Small is supposed to work is that it's format agnostic. So if a story was best told through a podcast, we would make a podcast. If it meant producing a documentary, we would fund that. But 52 eventually became the core of our intellectual exercise, because the idea was if we could focus all our efforts on bringing out one great work of journalism every week, then that would give us a pool of stories that could then end up reaching not only readers and people who are engaged in long form, in reading long form journalism, and people who are interested in stories about the Indian subcontinent, but also perhaps eventually people who might never read a 52 story at all, but might listen to a podcast based on that story, or might, I don't know, watch a Hindi movie that was based on one of the stories. And in that sense, 52 feels very small because it's a little magazine, right? If it brings out one story a week, when virtually every other publication brings out 75 a day. But the idea was really to focus on slowness, on depth, and on as much polish as we could bring to a story.
That's wonderful. And having read quite a few pieces, and it's 52 is absolutely for me, because I love the longer forms of journalism. It's absolutely been a rabbit.
You've been a writer yourself of such journalism, having contributed to the Caravan, among other places.
And so it was absolutely a rabbit hole for me, and I just didn't notice how the time passed, because every story was so compelling in a own different way. Also, you spoke about slowness and you spoke about depth, and of course, long reads, the long form website long reads. There's no effective consensus-based definition for what is long form journalism, but long read says anything over 1,500 words, you can consider it long form. And so definitely your 52.in is long form journalism. And what was the reasoning behind choosing this form of choosing long form journalism, especially in an age when it is alleged, we don't really know if it's true, but it is alleged that people are losing patience, that people won't stick with any one story for long, that video mediums have overtaken text as the default mode for most people.
Yeah, I have to say, I think it is true that our attention spans have been hacked, to use the phrase, the word of choice. It is very difficult to focus on something that works in depth, that demands perhaps several layers of attention. One of the things that I took comfort from in 52 is that my co-founders and I never intended for 52 to be a blockbuster website where millions of people would turn up to read every story. Although naturally, I have, if there are millions of people who turn up to read us every week, I welcome them all. Please come, stay, spend a weekend with us.
And may it happen.
Thank you. The idea was always to find our community, to take these stories to anyone, anywhere in the world, for whom these subjects mattered, for whom it would perhaps open a door in their mind, and perhaps even in their hearts. And we knew that community to start with wasn't the same community that you find for a more popular, quick, snacky sort of website.
Right.
But the thing is, even if that community is small, we know that it's passionate, right? The readers and writers always want to find each other. They always want to find. They always want to find what the other is reading. They always want to talk to each other about reading and writing and thinking. And that is how all the great magazines of the world have sustained themselves. While I am shy of putting 52 in the company of the sort of journals that I'm thinking of that have lasted for 100 years and still managed to get a captive audience, the fact that it's been done before means that 52 is not unique in what it's trying to do. So that gave me courage. The other thing that really helped Suhit was that it is nothing short of an enormous privilege to be editing a publication like this, because the sort of writers and the sort of reportorial talent that is in India is outstanding. And one of the things, and really perhaps sort of my core purpose with 52, apart from, hopefully telling people stories that they had not heard before and introducing new perspectives through the sort of journalism we do, was just to give writers support in telling the stories that they wanted to tell, but didn't have the time or the money or the editorial backing to actually do. And I must say that that has actually been spectacularly challenging through the pandemic, which perhaps we can talk about later. But our contributors make it exceptionally easy to publish 52 week after week.
And that beautifully segues into my next set of questions, which is what is the okay, so the 52's tagline is journalism done right. So what according
let me stop you there. That was a joke that my co-founder who helped design the website kind of put down there. It was like a bit of tag text. And I've been asking him to remove it for a long time, but he's just like, now that it's there, you just have to make it. He's not a journalist himself, he's a designer, and sort of he works.
Okay. Okay. But okay. So next question would be, what is the editorial direction? What is the shall we say clutch of issues that in the first year you plan to or what are the broad kind of bouquet of themes that you're looking at this year, or is it not really as simple as that?
No, some themes have emerged, which I'll talk about in a minute. I'd love to hear your thoughts on them too. But I have to say that we started seriously working on 52 in, I'll say, December 2019, with the aim of beginning to publish in July 2020. I thought, that sort of Bastille Day, we'll have our first story out, Vive la Révolution. And by March, we realized that we were no longer going to live in a recognizable world. So it was pretty devastating for our small team to realize that the first few contracts we'd signed were all with journalists who intended to go out, travel, bring back stories from the interiors of India, to tell stories about unusual subjects, to go and meet people who aren't often spoken to and whose voices aren't represented in the English media. And none of that was possible anymore, right? So the U-turn we took after what was for me a pretty emotional time was to say, okay, let's try and see what we can do that's true to our mission, which is to tell these in-depth, hopefully enlightening, really entertaining stories about our neighborhood. How can we call them up from sources who we don't have to endanger by meeting them in person? And so we were very lucky because many of the writers who were under contract with us turned around and said, yes, okay, let me think about what else I can do. So, for example, Sarita Santoshini, who had a pretty heavy duty sort of travel schedule lined up for an incredibly exciting, delicate story that she was going to report, turned around and said, I want to tell the story about this moment in the history of the Indian feminist movement. Sunaina Kumar, who was...
Brilliant story.
I'm so glad you liked it. Thank you. Sunaina Kumar, who told the story of how Sikkim acceded to India, was originally going to travel outside India to a neighboring country, again to bring back what I think would have been an incredibly sensitive story. And she ended up telling this one instead, and I think it's still one of the most popular stories that we've ever done. And I mean, the same thing with Bhavya Dore, who was going to travel to Karnataka and bring out a story just in time for the Olympics, which also ended up not happening in 2020. Great sports story, among other things. Bhavya can write about everything well, but she's also a great sports journalist. And Bhavya came back to us after a few days of thinking about the situation we were in, and she said, "Oh, I want to tell the story of this mid-air collision that happened in 1994." And I think that was the moment that I thought, okay, whatever else happens, I think we can see 52 through in this new avatar, because I am obsessed with that story. I remember that 1995, I was a child then, you were too. I remember that story so clearly. And there's this weird Mandela effect for me with that, but in particular. But there were no photographs of the mid-air collision, right? But I have this distinct fake memory of the front page of the Times of India actually having a picture of two planes colliding.
Oh man,
it's fake. Yeah, it's fake. It's but it's in my head. So, but the story has stayed with me ever since it broke. And Bhavya, went and investigated it sort of all from her desk, and that ended up being the first story we put out. Sorry, this is a very long-winded way of saying that any themes that have emerged in on 52 have been. I mean, there's been a bit of improvisation in how that's turned out. So I think perhaps what readers will notice is how interested we are in history, because accessing archives and speaking to sources is a little easier than shoe leather report. Is a little easier sort of remotely than shoe leather reporting. We have a focus on animals, wildlife, and science, which is entirely thanks to my brilliant co-editor Vikram Shah, who, I mean, I'm lucky to be able to tell a dog from a cat, but Vikram is interested in the natural world and has taught me a lot about it. And so some of our most intriguing stories, I think, have come about because of science writers who've trusted us with stories about finding frog species in the Nilgiris, or the humongous challenge of making anti-venom, which is something that should not be an incredibly hard problem to solve, and yet is so difficult to solve that 60,000 people die of snake bites every year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course the session, now that you mention it, I think in around maybe 10 years back or somewhere around that time, I did a story for Open magazine, which was then Manu Joseph was the editor, about how the problem with anti-venom is leading to deaths, and there also the figure was the same. The figure, it's a very small story. I'm sure it was not as capacious as yours, but the figure is the same. It's staggering.
And it's fantastic. It's fascinating to know, and obviously it's devastating to you and I, because we live in a city. I mean, we live in a part of the city where we don't have to see snakes.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing, right? One of my hopes with 52 was always that by telling stories that didn't regularly make the front page, or that hadn't made the front pages in a long time, or that weren't part of the news cycle, was to give all of us a renewed sense of how connected many of the problems that we grapple with in life are. And I think particularly with our science stories,
absolutely,
one of the things that we've seen in two ways, in our stories about science and in the sort of political dimension that some of our stories have had, it's the humongous role that the state plays in how Indians live and die, is something that was practically invisible to us until, when I say us, I mean, of course, the sort of people who are on this Zoom call right now, and perhaps the people who will watch this on YouTube later. This was invisible to elites until fairly recently.
Absolutely.
And this is a theme that our media and our pop culture reckons with very inconsistently. So if you are the sort of reader who checks a certain set of websites and reads certain sections of the paper, perhaps you have a better sense of how true this is. But the fragility of Indian life and the power of the Indian institutions, and also the reverse, which is just the strength of the average Indian and the fragility of these Indian institutions. It's fascinating to see how they collide. And the more I've been working on, we've brought out over 30 stories now. And over a vast, well, we have a few, maybe 25 more to go before, not 25 more, we have about 15 more to go, I think, before before our first 52 is up.
That's like 100,000 words, maybe. I mean, that's a lot, which brings me to my next question. Before we get to actually sharing the website with and some of the stories, what is the level of involvement? Of course, there has to be a lot of it during the reporting stage, during the writing stage, during the can you give us some insight, because journalists and journalism students will be watching this, we think, on YouTube later.
Yes. So we are pretty interventionist editorially. The way this works is, I'll try and break it down to be as helpful as possible, but I'll also try to be brief. After someone sends us a pitch, or if we reach out to a writer with an idea, we do some amount of mutual work to develop that. Very often what Bikram and I say is, okay, we have an idea of what the subject is, but what is the story within the subject? Where is the through line? And once we are reasonably satisfied that there is a story, there's a beginning, middle, and end. If there are protagonists, or if there is something else that sort of really anchors the story, like a sense of place, or again a period in history. Once we've satisfied ourselves of all of that, and once we know that the story is doable, so the main sources are accessible, and the writer feels capable of taking this on, we sign a contract. After that, it can take anything from 3 weeks to 3 or 4 months before the first draft comes in. And it's not uncommon for us to touch base with writers during this time to see how they're doing. I personally feel very inadequate as an editor sitting at my desk, calling a reporter and saying, hey, how's it going? Can I be of any help? But I think sometimes I mean, reporting can be a lonely job sometimes, which is ironic considering that it's all about going out and meeting people. But I think just hearing a friendly voice, particularly in the years 2020, 2021, is important. And then once that comes in, it can take us anything from 3 weeks to 3 months again to edit. During this time, a story typically goes through several drafts. There's a first edit that looks at the structure, that tries and takes a step back to see if there's more reporting that's needed. I mean, more often than not, our brilliant journalists end up with more outstanding reporting material than that can actually go into the story. So at this stage, we have to make some hard choices about what the story is really about and what, unfortunately, it isn't. The second and third edits are then sort of much closer rewrites. We go sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. Because this is the thing, right? I feel like most journalists, I mean, perhaps journalists there are some journalists who dislike having their copy touched. But you can't, if you're writing something that's more than, I mean, okay, let me be a little conservative here and say, if you're writing something that's more than 3,500 words long, you can't get it right on the first draft. It's you know so much more than you can put down on the page, and 3,500 words is no joke. Everybody, I think everybody who is a writer, from a poet to a novelist to a historian, knows that first draft is just It's just the fundament, and you have to rewrite.
To put it mildly.
To put it mildly, yeah. As a poet yourself, I suppose you are closer to the idea that rewriting is writing. I think it was Nabokov who said there's no reading, there's only rereading, and I think we can agree that there's no writing, there's only rewriting. But journalists to come back to it, journalists often don't get the benefit of that, right? Because they don't have the time to do that. And traditionally in newspapers, you don't, like, once your copy is gone, it's gone. Then someone else does the rewrite for you. So there's some hand-holding on that count involved. And then after that, then, sort of there's a polish, there's a fact check, and so on and so forth. And then what you see in front of you is the final product.
And it's absolutely coming to the stories themselves. I was quite struck by the beautiful architecture of the stories, but also the layouts. It's beautiful. The whole production is just so beautiful. And
we were very lucky. My co-founder Gaurav was the main driver of how the website looks and functions. And obviously we had brilliant designers in a firm in Ahmedabad called Three-Sided Coin, who brought our dreams to reality, to life, and who exceeded our vision for how beautiful the website would be. So we're very lucky. Please also let me say that I think our main hero, apart from the journalists, is Akshaya Elizabeth Zakaria, who is our illustrator. One of the things we realized when the pandemic struck was that we wouldn't have bandwidth to publish a very heavily illustrated story every week. One, because photography costs money, and you have to pay photographers money. And I want to, I don't currently have the budgets to do that. Two, photographers aren't really able to go out and photograph. So that's a problem. Second, I thought, why not just lean into this idea that you kind of fall into the rabbit hole of the story and you read it for as long as it takes you without the typical breaks that online magazines give you. So Akshaya makes one illustration for every story. And then we sort of try and break up the page with typography, with full quotes, with little chapter breaks, and that helps us.
And it just works so beautifully well. It gives you a pause. It gives you rhythm.
I can truly take pride in that because I have nothing to do with it. So.
And now to come to the stories,
yes.
I believe we've selected 3 stories per your wish. The first story and the last 2 stories, so that there is some sort of bookending. So you don't have to choose a favorite.
I changed my mind a little bit. So yes, because I could not choose a favorite because it would be impossible. I thought the fairest thing to do would be to give readers a sense of the first story and the most recent story. But also we commissioned an essay by an academic that ended up being weirdly relevant. We published it kind of just as the second wave struck. And I think for all of us who are perhaps decompressing, if we're lucky, from the horror that the last couple of months have been, I think perhaps it might be nice to give you a sense of that essay and what it said.
That would be fabulous. Would you like to share your screen? Would you like me to do it for you?
Hold on. Let me just.
Are you seeing the there, wonderful.
You see it?
Fabulous.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm showing you the homepage of 52 right now. This is what it looks like on the desktop.
Yeah.
One of the things I should say is that our design team and and Gaurav realized very quickly that these stories would vastly be read on mobile. And 70% of our readership reads our website on their phone. So what you see may look a little different from what the typical reader sees.
I see.
But here you have a sense of what the homepage looks like. I'm also just moving quickly through the variety of.
Yes. Wonderful.
Please just enjoy Akshaya's illustrations while you see these.
They're beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
And I thought perhaps I would give you a sense of Bhavya Dore's story, Khule.
Yes, please.
which is for those of you who may be too young to remember, the story of two international flights that collided into each other and went up in flames just outside Delhi airport, killing everyone on board. Hundreds of people died, and the burning fuselage, corpses, luggage, all of it rained down in the mustard and cotton fields of a little village, what was then a little village called Chakki. Not only was the incident incredibly horrifying in its own terms, it was perhaps the worst aviation disaster to occur above Indian soil, and maybe one of the worst aviation disasters in history. But it happened at a time where Indian institutions and the world both realized that aviation itself would have to change if we needed to make it safer. And they had not only the insight, but also the will to change. So while this is the story of a tragedy, it's also the story of how many disparate institutions around the world took decisions that helped to make sure that when you and I take a flight today, it's practically impossible that something like this could happen to us again.
Mm.
So should I show you the next story?
If you like, if you could scroll down just a little bit so that people get a sense of the sweep of the story in some way. And this is I believe this is one of the stories which is chronologically which is written chronologically in an almost cinematic sense, where blow by blow
you're very right about that. I mean, look at this line. At about 9 p.m., Prannoy Roy finished reading for the news tonight. Wire services broke this. I mean, just the sense, like the layers in that, right? For people like you and I, who perhaps as children remember seeing Prannoy Roy on our black and white screens or whatever.
Absolutely. It just takes you behind that whole, into that whole area, time.
And a character in the story emerges from this. The great writer Natasha Badwai, who was then working as a journalist, ended up being one of the first people on site. She was one of Bhavya's interviewees for the story, and I think one of Bhavya's triumphs in this story was to take some fairly technical problems, because the reason for this collision was incredibly technical. It wasn't a drunk pilot or whatever.
Right.
She managed to give us a sense of exactly what went wrong. So after you read this story, you would be able to describe that to someone else without making it feel overly complicated.
Right. So you can just tell it like a story, part of a story instead of a factoid.
Yeah, I think this is actually I realize, with every story, in some ways it gets not easier but harder. I realize that is the editorial challenge, to take the arcane, to take the technical, to take facts in sort of all their complexity, and to give people, to make them stick to people's hearts and minds, to make them realize that this matters to them. That having information, having the facts, having the truth described to you matters to you. I think that is the great bridge that we all have to cross.
Absolutely. So she has also
this is the chronological bit that you were talking about.
Yes.
The last few minutes where we reconstruct what exactly went wrong in the cockpits. This comes quite late in the story, as you can see, because by now you have a sense of who these people are who were involved, who were the people who died, what was the situation in the Indian skies at the time.
Right.
So we've gone into the setup, we've told you what's happened. So in some sense, you're able to appreciate what the moment of the accident itself now, because the scale of the tragedy has been committed to your memory. I think maybe in the second and third drafts, and then every time after I read that, it's very difficult for me not to choke up when I read these bits, which are very, very tragic, of course. I read I read this for an audio narration a few months ago, back when we could still go to studios, and it was very difficult for me to kind of stay calm. Okay, we're close to the, yeah. And then sort of after we do that, then you see what the aftermath was. You
Right.
understand exactly, I mean, because you know the scope of the problem, you're then able to see how we, kind of fixed the gaps, how we worked with the international community to make this, to make sure that this would never happen.
Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous.
All credit to Bhavya, of course, and then she ends on a very poignant note where she talks about the fact that this tragedy is forgotten, even by people who were alive at the time. I think one real reason for that is actually that something like this could never happen again. Hopefully, we hope. But another equally real reason is that none of the people who died were like us. They were working class people, they were foreigners. If they were Indians, they were they were Indians from sort of lower strata of society who were on their way to do manual labor in Saudi Arabia or places like that. And it was very difficult to identify people. Not everybody, but some of the people who died in this. So that made it quite hard. Yes, here we are. One of our innovations is to have an acknowledgement. Is to have an acknowledgements note. It's just easier. Because we would really like our readers and writers to be focused on the narrative. We don't have hyperlinks within the text, and kind of the typical sort of attribution style that you see in newspapers. I wanted to move away from that. And
thank you for it. It disturbs the flow of the main text. You
realize when that happens. You're right. And I think this is, and I think a note like this is actually useful for people, right? Who want to read further, who want to see the scope of what Bhavya's research is like. And I think one of the things this allows us to do, which we typically don't get the space to do as journalists, is to thank our interviewees. Because they've labored for our stories. So I think expressing a little gratitude is warranted.
Absolutely. And and it's also really, really good journalistic practice, which is, if it's something in the if it's not from if it's on the record, then you're pretty much pointing people towards it, which is great.
Absolutely. I'm glad you think so. Thank you.
And of course, this is another innovation, which is that the people outside and behind the magic curtain are all shown to you in this form.
I'm really glad you like it. I mean, of course, I think Akshaya, our illustrator, Medha, our copy editor, our editorial assistant, are all people who have a share in making the story what it is. I take sort of my role and Vikram's role over here to be one of sort of responsibility. So, if we've screwed up in any way, you know who to catch. But I think I'm more comfortable with this as both in terms of attributing, excuse me, both in terms of ascribing sort of roles to the labor that has gone into the story, and for accountability.
Absolutely. And again, this is very, very much in line with what a few international outlets are doing, where at least they mention the name of the person who last edited the story.
That's right.
Although you've gone a step further, that's wonderful. And now that we're talking of stories, before we move on to looking at another story, I'm absolutely gobsmacked, by the sheer range, and apart from the depth, the sheer range of stories. So you have but all of them seem to me to be kind of ideas that many people think are central to Indianness in a subcontinental sense. So there's an absolutely beautiful story from Pakistan about the sari, which is a shared subcontinental heritage, and there is this absolutely illuminating article about how India chose testing-based medicine over Ayurveda, and so relevant again in a Covidocene period. And
yeah.
yes,
this was one of the stories. This was the third story I chose that I wanted to show people. I agree exactly. We when we spoke to Kiran about this, we had no idea. The pandemic was on, but we had absolutely no idea that things would get this bad. And then this became more relevant than ever, as you said. Yeah,
absolutely. So which is the next story which you would like to just brush us through?
Perhaps we can talk, since you brought up the cure, perhaps we can talk about that. Dr. Kiran Kumbhar is a PhD candidate at Harvard at the moment. And we have been in touch for maybe close to a year. Dr. Kumbhar is one of the few people that I've been in touch with for one part of the 52 vision, which was really, really good academic thinking and research distilled into a form of storytelling, into a form of essay writing that would be accessible and interesting to a general reader. And we were of course incredibly fortunate to have him write for us. He thinks about a lot of different things related to the history of medicine in India, and he had a bunch of ideas, and we settled on this one because I thought this would be a fairly straightforward story to tell. I can't just, okay, when I say that, I mean, I thought of it editorially as, okay, this is a story for which I can see the beginning, middle, and end quite clearly, which had more to do with my ignorance than anything else. But as it turned out, worked out just fine. And Kiran sent this in early this year, I want to say, and it took us 2 or 3 rounds of edit on this. He was incredibly patient with us because, when you work with an academic, when you work with a good academic, they at any given point of time know 7 times more than they've actually put into the story. So sort of when you as an editor, but I think that's also where you as an editor come in, right? You have to be the first reader. And
absolutely. Can you hear me, Supriya?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, that was just a little blip.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. The connection issues, maybe. We missed one sentence, I think, that last sentence you said.
I think one of the functions we play as editors is to come in and be the first readers of a story. So in all humility, we ask questions that we imagine readers would have if they encountered this text. If there are gaps in our knowledge, or if we have heard of something as being different from what is being stated in the text, then it's our duty to bring that up so that our writer knows that this is potentially something that they are having to deal with. This is potentially something they have to deal with when their work reaches a wider readership. But it was great fun for us to work on this. We started work on it, I think, just before the fury of the second wave hit our major cities, and then sort of we polished it just as the sirens were going off around us. And we realized that this was really one of the services. We were able to perform one of the services that we have always wanted 52 to perform in a more direct way than ever before, which is to take a subject that is not necessarily in the headlines.
Right.
What is the history of evidence-based medicine in India? And how did it distinguish itself in competition with traditional medicine? Is that relevant to what we're living with today? Absolutely. Is it a perspective you hear often? Not necessarily. And I don't think there was a better mind to explain this to us than Kiran. And I mean, he wrote it. One of the things I really appreciate how readably he wrote it. Soon into the story, you come to this story that perhaps a lot of people who know the life of Gandhi know, which is that when Gandhi is a young man, he sort of timidly asks his parents if he should maybe study medicine, and of course his father or rather his older brother says, "How can you do that? You have to touch dirty things." But there are so many people who don't know that.
No.
And because Gandhi, shapes the India that we come to live in, to have this little connection between his personal history and the history of medicine in India, it's pretty fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a
yeah, he turns up again in the story later. This is one of the few stories where we decided, sort of, because Kiran had some very nice illustrations on hand, we realized that this was a cool one to include. Very, very fascinating. The Sassoon General Hospital in Pune, a name that's familiar to you and I as Mumbaikars. Daji Lad, another of our heroes. Muthulakshmi Reddy, whom I only knew of as a pioneering but also very complicated feminist.
And then, so I mean, this is dealing with not only, this is dealing with the history of medicine. It's also a part of, how a nation took its bearings in terms of its public policies. And so there's a lot of stuff to connect, that the story connects to. And that's really the beauty of, one of the beauties of a story like this, which is you can launch, you can go off on another trajectory after reading it based on that story. So
thank you for bringing that up. I think so too. I was interested in this precisely for that reason when Kiran first started working on it. The fact that it became kind of immediately connected to our lives and the terrible controversies brewing around us in terms of our medical options was. I mean, I would have preferred if that was not the case, obviously. But, but it worked out. Yeah. One of the things, that Kiran goes through in the story very briefly that he touches on is how our popular culture colluded with Indian elites to make sure that evidence-based medicine was presented as something desirable, worthy, aspirational, and helpful, among other things. And you can see that in that piecemeal way, sort of early Hindi cinema between, I guess, the 40s and the 70s was very much about being in lockstep with India's progressive ideals, right? So even though it may not seem like enough now, or it may seem hypocritical, the fact that doctors were lionized, the fact that that's just one of the many ways I think in which Hindi cinema helped build consensus for a kind of modernity for that we could all share in, even if it was imperfect. So this was I think about that a lot personally. So this was very fascinating to me.
Yes, and then of course the pre-freedom movement, the freedom movement comes into it. It's just so many.
Yeah, I mean, you realize one of the things you realize is that if it were not for, I have no compunctions in saying this, if it were not for the progressive wing of the Congress Party and of the leftist movements, you and I would not be here today.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We might either never have been born, or we might have died, as children of cot death, or we would not be permitted to speak to each other as an unrelated man and woman.
Absolutely.
Or we would not have a language in common. And many of these things that we take for granted today. I'm sorry to anyone who thinks otherwise, but yeah, it's all contingent on this small slice of Indian history in the nationalist movement.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this was one of again, this is one of my favorite stories from the website.
Thank you so much. It is unique because it's one of the few. I mean, we hoped for much more than we eventually ended up doing, but this is one of the few stories where we have had an academic or a researcher who's come and sort of worked with us to tell an aspect of history for a general audience. I hope
it's so damn rare in India that this kind of intersection takes place. It's either career journalists who are shoehorned into writing about these things, or academics who can't communicate with in a more colloquial, perhaps, register. And this is just a massive find, really, I must say.
Well, I'm really glad you think so. I think when writers like Ram Guha, who have always described their work as being at the intersection of journalism and academia, first started publishing, we realized, I think that helped many people realize what the way forward was. But I think the avenues to do this are few. And again, I think the editorial support for these things is harder to come by than not.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm very fortunate to have been able to participate in this. Okay. And I thought perhaps I could show you our newest story. We published it this Friday.
Yes.
It's called Scales, and it features this friendly little snake. I'm rather phobic of snakes, but again, Akshaya made this guy look very chill. And this is it. This is what you and I were talking about. And again, I think obliquely, this ended up being about the situation that we're in. If we know that we can prevent senseless, needless deaths, and we know that the problem is at a scale that perhaps only the Indian state can resolve satisfactorily, where are the gaps? Where are we going wrong? So I don't necessarily, while the hope is for every reader who reads this to absorb what it means to live in a country where 58,000 of our countrymen are dying year after year. And let me widen this out. If you're anywhere in the world and you realize that we're in a situation where you have 58,000 people dying every year of snake bite because they live in conditions where they cannot wear boots when they go out to do agricultural labor because the boots will depress the soil, which is not good for sowing, but which then leaves them vulnerable to being bitten by snakes. And you realize that even if this is the case, not all of these people necessarily need to die. Hopefully it leads you to question why not, and what can be done. But if you're not interested in the in the philosophical or the political sense of that, Kamakshi Iyer, wonderful reporter who just, again, I think it was a severe setback not to be able to travel for this story, but I saw Kamakshi sort of the layers of her reporting. She sort of delivered a first draft with one layer of reporting in place, and then kind of she took a breath, and then she came back with a second draft that sort of went several levels deeper.
Okay.
It's I'm in awe of her ability to do this. And I messaged her the day the story came out saying, I think between Akshaya and you finally reconciled me to actually thinking about snakes without my skin crawling. This is a science story and a health story. It's it zooms in and out of what the problem is. So you learn a lot from it, hopefully. Again, for someone like me, the idea that there's a big four, but then there are actually like sort of 56 others that who can bite you and then you can die, and whose venom you can die of. All of this was like sort of very new to me. But one of the things that I got from Kamakshi's story was also, and hopefully you will sort of those listening in will see as well, is just this passionate, incredibly knowledgeable community of herpetologists, of people who care, of NGOs who care deeply about snake bites, who just don't make it to our radar on a normal day because they're out of the news cycle more often than not. You get to know these people and the work that they do, and I think that is one of the nicest things about the story for me. Some great quotes, of course, because anti-venom is so difficult to come by, and because evidence-based medicine, the subject of our last story, is still very intimidating or inaccessible for a lot of people. More often than not, the first thing you do when you get a snake bite is go to a faith healer.
Yes.
Because for thousands of years, that's what people have been doing, right? And also, I presume above everything else, it's just cheaper. But these guys just, they can't. Like no faith healer can act. If you're going to die, a faith healer is not going to be able to stop that. Which is why, as Romulus Whitaker says, you could have a 90% success rate even though the methods are totally bogus, because many people don't actually die of snake bite. The venom doesn't, there's a chance that the venom won't kill you. So it's just, these guys are just trading on that. You could be giving Coca-Cola instead of a herbal preparation.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you so much for asking about this stuff, Sudhir. This was one of my favorite bits, knowing that there's an evolutionary venomics lab, knowing what venom is made up of. All of this was just, it's nerdy, look, but the thing is, so many of us are nerds. We are interested in this stuff.
Absolutely.
So why not embrace that?
Absolutely. And it's nerd culture. The most hackneyed statement is, because it is true, is that nerd culture is now mainstream. So
that's quite right. Actually, I made these little text breakers that are the pits in which snakes are held. In places like the Snake Catchers Industrial Cooperative Society, where people from the Irula tribe, who have traditionally been engaged in this, extract the venom from the snakes to make anti-venom. So yes, this is our
okay. So that's that's fabulous. So to continue with the questions,
yes,
for a bit.
Should I stop sharing my screen?
Yes, please. So just a few more questions before I see before we look at some questions from the audience, which is, how is there any plan to? I noticed that all the stories right now are free to view.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any plans for a paywall or any other way of keeping the accountants happy?
So my co-founders and I have so far been adamantly against the idea of putting the stories behind a paywall. The idea is that 52 stories a year should be free to read. But one of the things we are considering is evolving a subscriber community where we can offer, among others, we offer you benefits in addition to the stories, and you pay to support our writers, to be part of this benefits program, and perhaps access more work by 52. Having said which, in the short term, this is the worst time possible for us to actually make that happen. So you will be hearing from us in the coming weeks and months about it. I mean, this is very much a one. I will say honestly that these plans feel very much like a work in progress because the situation around us feels like a work in progress. So if we come to a point where it seems necessary to put the stories behind a paywall, I mean, to me right now that seems impossible. But if the situation demands, it may just have to be that we have to do that. So we will see.
Of course. And how do you go forward? When you hit the magic figure of 52, or when you do it 3 times or 5 times, the cycle, what happens? What happens to 52? Where do you see?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about. We have been thinking about actively since we began publishing, and all I can say for now is that I can't share very many details. But I think we are in the background seeing our first 52 stories as the culmination of the first chapter of 52, and that what comes with the next 52 in many ways is likely to be different.
Of course. Last question would be, that's pretty much can you give us a hint of what's coming next?
No, I'll tell you what's coming next.
Okay.
The story. Yeah, I will tell you exactly what's coming next for our next 3 stories. We have a film journalist whom I've admired for a long time, who is bringing out an oral history. This is a particularly difficult format, that's pioneered in American entertainment journalism.
And you've done one of those with that.
You did, yeah. You just interviewed. It's pure interviewing. The energy it takes is incredible. He is doing an oral history of an incredibly popular and influential movie. We have a reporter who has done a deep dive into the history of one of the most significant schemes the Indian state has ever enacted. And to me, it's no less than a history of India. It's a longer story than usual. Sorry. It's both an explainer and a history and a political analysis. Sorry, that's 3 things, not 2. And I can't wait for, again, I think it's one of those things that those of us who've been through the last few months will just have there's just going to be a new layer of sympathy for what's in the story. So I'm very excited for people to read that. And we have a historian who has written a great mini biography of a phenomenal woman, one of the first diplomats in the history of modern India, and it's everything that I hope a 52 story will be. It's about a great character. It's also about a moment in the history of India. It's about an Indian institution that kind of permeates our lives, but that we don't necessarily know enough about. So please look forward to these and read our work and support us.
Absolutely. And I should also add, they have a newsletter you can put, right? You can.
We do. You have to. Yeah, it's a little difficult to subscribe to it. You have to scroll all the way down to the bottom. But some of this is just, we as a small team that still sees our work in beta, we've been reluctant to really sort of go out there and make a huge push, which some of you may think was, it's probably like a dumb idea. But let us have this. Yeah. You have to scroll to the bottom of the website and sign up for the weekly newsletter, so you can get an email update. So in case Twitter, goes off air in India, as rumors have it, you know how to find us.
Absolutely. And please do, please, guys, please do. So now let's look at the questions that we have from the audience. Can you see this? I'll read them out in case you can't
Yes,
see them.
please. Why don't you read them out? Yeah.
So Devdatta Paul asks, I am a science writer / journalist. I've seen a lot of focus on biology and ecology within the science media, which I am trying to change as an individual. How open is 52 to practice affirmative action towards other fields in science? And what is the way I can pitch an idea?
Thank you for that. I actually, that's a new idea to me as well. But I see instantly where that problem lies, because we too are very interested in biology and ecology. I think the easiest way to change this would be to send us a pitch about a story that you are passionate about, and that we will do our best to work with you on.
And you can find their email on their website. It's
you can, and you can email me. I'm at Supriya at allthingsmall.in. It's in my Twitter bio, among other things. So
another question, I mean, again, if you think it's intrusive, feel free to ignore it, but what's the business model of 52? What were the reasons for choosing this model?
The business model of 52 is tied to the business model of All Things Small. The idea was always to profit from the media that we make. So 52 was kind of the core that focused purely on stories, on journalism, on research. And sort of the allied companies, the allied divisions rather, would focus on selling podcasts, producing documentaries. One of the things that has really kept us afloat during the pandemic has been a very small branding arm that was intended to do just a few projects that were kind of in line with the what the company does. That sort of has ended up taking off during the pandemic. So that's basically how we make our money. And in the future, 52 will hopefully be self-sustaining because we expand the variety of things that we do as a storytelling platform, and hopefully because we will be able to welcome in a community of paying subscribers.
Wonderful. So Supriya, is there anything that you think I have left out that you feel the audience should know?
No, I only wish that we could have heard more from our audience. It feels extremely strange to be on this side of an interview. So, but I'm very grateful to you and to our audience who gave up an hour on a Saturday to listen to me.
Again, thank you so much for doing this. This is always, it's always a wonderfully informative experience speaking to you. And all the best for 52 and for All Things Small. Guys, please follow us on Instagram for further updates about our future sessions. We also upload all sessions, including this one will also be uploaded on YouTube on our Pen at Prithvi YouTube channel, and we are fortnightly. So please catch us for future sessions. Thank you so much, Supriya.
I look forward to catching the next Pen at Prithvi session. Bye. Thank you so much, Suhit. It's been great speaking to you. Thank you everyone for listening to us.